So now what we're going to cover is animal cells and plant cells. Now, animal cells are a bit more basic than plant cells, and we're going to go through the different parts of them. Now, there's many different types of cells in your body. We're going to go through, for example, sperm cells, nerve cells that take electrical impulses, fat cells, muscle cells. They all have a different function. Generally, all right, cells, animal cells have this kind of what we call, the cell membrane. I'm going to draw it out. The nucleus. There's many parts, but some cells don't have all the parts. Okay, I'll give you an example. So your red blood cells, right? They deliver oxygen. Okay, they kind of have a concave shape. We're going to go through red blood cells later on, but they're a concave shape. And they just transport oxygen, not just, but it's a pretty important job. But they transport oxygen, but they don't have a nucleus, and that's just to maximize the amount of oxygen they take. Like I said, we're going to go through this in a bit more detail, but animal cells generally, so what I'm going to talk about is about the general, what most cells contain, and they're going to have more or less, okay? So, especially the cells that are involved in a lot of energy. So, for example, sperm cells, they are swimming about, okay, trying to get to the egg cell. So they need a lot of energy. And there's certain parts of a specific cell that uses energy. So guess what? They're going to have more of those parts that produce energy because they need more energy. So we're going to go through the different parts of a cell. So the first part of the cell I want to talk about is the kind of like empty space that you typically see. Well, it's not actually the empty space, but what we give it is a specific name. We call it the cytoplasm. So the cytoplasm, like I said, is a jelly-like solution, and it's a massive part of the actual cell. Now, the cytoplasm is where lots of reactions take place, where the cells keep alive. It also stores a lot of nutrients that are needed by the cell. And this is where all the organelles are going to be. So we call these organelles, these are little structures. So one of them being the nucleus and mitochondria and so forth. We'll go through them, but they're all going to exist in this location. Now, many of these organelles, so for example, the nucleus, I'm not referring specifically to the nucleus when I'm talking about this following statement, but many of these organelles, ribosomes and so forth, which are very small, you cannot actually see them normally, not with a light microscope. So a light microscope, you see them in your schools. They rely on light, but they are not going to be good enough to see these little compartments. These little compartments, you're going to need a step up. And the step up in this case is going to be an electron microscope, which uses electrons which can see much more detailed. Now, I'm not going to go through these telescopes in detail. Later on, if it's part of your specification, there will be a video about this. Now, let's talk about the next step, which is going to be the nucleus. So over here, I drew the nucleus. It's the largest actual organelle of the cell. And it has kind of like a control. It's kind of like a brain, but you do not use the word brain in your exam paper. But it's kind of like the control. It decides what is the cell's function going to be. Now, not all cells actually have a nucleus, especially those that don't carry out complex tasks. So one of them, for example, in plants, we're going to go through it, is xylem. So the xylem is responsible for carrying water through the plant, water and minerals. That doesn't need any nucleus. Another one that I talked about before is the actual red blood cells to maximize the amount of oxygen that the cell is going to carry. Now, inside the actual nucleus, so if I write nucleus, inside the actual nucleus is something else. And that something else is chromosomes, okay? So humans, we have a total of 46 chromosomes, which exist as actual pairs. Now, don't panic and oh no, what is a chromosome? This guy is going a bit crazy. We'll go through this in steps, but at the moment, right, just know that there's some chromosomes, different animals have different amount of chromosomes and so forth. And what these chromosomes are, okay, what makes up the chromosomes is actual DNA, okay? And what makes up the DNA, so this is going to be a kind of long sequence, but so that what actually makes up the DNA is actually your genes. Now, I'm not going to go too much into detail, but these genes determine what proteins are actually made, okay? And DNA always stays in the nucleus. But I'm not going to go too much into detail about it at this stage, but your nucleus actually communicates, it sends this kind of message to something else, which is responsible for creating these actual proteins that we're going to go through, and these are called ribosomes. But I want to take this in steps, okay? So rather than just going a bit crazy, let's just, just pause the video, absorb this as much information as you possibly can, and we'll take it a bit further later on. Now, one important thing about these ribosomes is they are too small to be seen by a light microscope. So if you do ever want, you're a bit curious, you're like, I want to see what this guy in the science videos is talking about, you're going to have to use an electron microscope. Now, one of the important things that proteins can make are, for example, enzymes, which make sure that your body is alive and functioning properly. Now, another thing about these enzymes is they do chemical reactions. Guess where the chemical reactions take place? Well, like I said before, these chemical reactions will take place in the cytoplasm. Now, other functions of proteins can be hair, nails. They also help with transport. So, for example, you remember the red blood cells I talked about, right? Well, they actually contain a red protein inside it, known as hemoglobin, which helps transport oxygen. So these proteins, there's so many different types of proteins that we could go through. Heck, they could even protect your body with antibodies and things like that. So, you got to take care of your proteins. Now, another part of the cell is this outer coat, and we'll give it the specific name, the cell membrane. Now, the cell membrane is kind of similar to a skin, and we give it the term partially permeable. Permeable means allow through. So partially only allows certain chemicals to go through, depending on the size of the actual molecules, on the solubility of the actual molecules. So it's controlling what comes in and out. Now, it's not completely permeable. So that's why we say partially permeable. So the final part of the actual animal cell is the mitochondria. Okay, if we call one of them mitochondrion, but several of them, we call it mitochondria. So these create a lot of energy. Now, think about it. What part of your body, what cells are responsible for needing a lot of energy? So that will be muscle cells, because you need to get energy to move things. Also, for example, sperm cells, because they need to swim to the actual egg, and also nerve cells. And nerve cells transmit electrical impulses throughout the body. So these are where respiration actually takes place, where the energy is actually produced. So you can say they are a central site for where energy production takes place. Now, you sometimes hear the word ATP. Don't worry about it, but this is just the currency. This is how we say energy. And to create that energy, guess what? You're going to have to give up something. You're going to have to give up some, because this goes down to physics. So, I'm going to sneak in a bit of physics here. But this is where chemical energy, so glucose, what the food you eat, is broken down and given as a ATP energy.
If you want the free lessons and free worksheet split by exam boards, so you only revise the stuff that you need, visit my website, revisebody.co.uk.